My wife cheated with my twin brother. Part 1. The beginning of the end. It's funny how life can go from feeling like a fairy tale to a complete nightmare in an instant. I married my high school sweetheart, Kelly, 8 years ago. She was my everything. Beautiful, smart, funny, and compassionate. Together, we built a life that felt impenetrable. A cozy home, 2 young kids who lit up our world, and a bond that I thought could weather anything. And then there was Eric, my twin brother, the other half of me, or at least it's how it felt growing up. Eric and I were inseparable as kids. He was the charming one, the guy who could make a room burst into laughter without trying. I was quieter, more grounded. At least that's what I told myself. As adults, life had pulled us in different directions. Eric moved to the city for work, where he bounced between tech startups and trendy apartments, while I settled down in our small hometown. We still talked, though, and when he visited, he had a way of lighting up the room. The last time Eric came to visit, Kelly was unusually excited. She spent hours preparing for his arrival, cooking his favorite meals, even picking out a new dress. I didn't think much of it. Kelly always had a knack for hospitality. But something was off. She seemed happier, more vibrant, in ways I hadn't seen in months. I chalked it up to the excitement of having family over. Eric stayed for the weekend. We spent time reminiscing, playing with the kids, and catching up over beers on the porch. Everything seemed normal until the night before he left. That evening, Kelly decided to go to bed early. Eric and I stayed up talking about life, his job, and the struggles Kelly and I had been facing lately. I confided in him, something I rarely did with anyone, about the tension in my marriage. Kelly had been distant, irritable, like there was a wall between us that I couldn't break down. Eric listened intently, his brow furrowing in sympathy. Maybe she just needs space, he suggested. Sometimes people need room to figure out what they really want. At the time, his words felt like advice from a caring brother. But looking back, they hit differently now, like breadcrumbs leading me to a truth I wasn't ready to face. The next morning, I found a note in the kitchen, scribbled in Kelly's handwriting. Went for a walk with Eric. Be back soon. That was the moment a seed of doubt was planted. Why would they need to go for a walk together, alone? When they returned, Kelly seemed flustered, avoiding my gaze. Eric, on the other hand, was as smooth as ever, cracking jokes and pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. That weekend, Eric left as planned, but he took more than just memories of his visit. Part 2. The Seed of Suspicion. After Eric left, life returned to normal, or at least what passed for normal. Kelly's behavior was different. Subtle things at first. She'd avoid eye contact during our conversations or leave the room to answer phone calls. Her laugh, once full and uninhibited, now felt forced when we were together. She started going to the gym more often and spending longer hours away from home under the guise of errands. I wanted to ignore the signs. Desperation will do that to you. I told myself I was overthinking, that her distance was just the stress of raising 2 kids, or maybe my fault for being inattentive. But doubts lingered. They grew roots. One day, I came home from work early. The house was quiet, the kids at school, and Kelly was supposed to be out grocery shopping. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. A message preview flashed. Eric, you were incredible last night. I can't stop thinking about it. I froze. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like it shattered. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the words, hoping I'd misread them. I picked up her phone, hands trembling, and unlocked it. The conversation thread between Kelly and Eric was worse than I could have imagined. Flirty banter, confessions of feelings, mentions of secret meetups. It wasn't just an affair, it was a connection, something that felt deeper, crueler. I couldn't breathe. My twin brother. My wife. This was the kind of betrayal you read about, the kind of thing that happens to other people, not to you. When Kelly walked through the door, I confronted her. My voice was raw, teetering between fury and heartbreak. What the hell is this? I said, shoving her phone in her face. Her eyes widened as she saw the messages. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a guilt flicker across her face, but then she straightened, her lips tightening into a defiant line. Let me explain, she said, her voice calm. Too calm. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted to unhear everything, to rewind my life to the day before Eric's visit, before the seed of suspicion had sprouted into this unbearable truth. Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with my brother? That you've been lying to my face while you... I couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt too sharp, too dangerous, like they cut me open if I said them aloud. Kelly sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. It's not what you think, she said weakly, but her voice carried no conviction. You're texting my brother about last night. How much worse could it possibly be? Her silence was damning. I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I needed space, air, anything to escape the suffocating weight of betrayal. My hands shook as I got into my car and drove aimlessly. The familiar roads blurred as tears welled up, spilling over despite my attempts to keep them at bay. How could he do this to me? How could she? As I pulled into an empty parking lot, I knew this was only the beginning. I'd uncovered the truth, but the storm it unleashed was just starting to roll in. Part 3. Confronting the mirror. I spent hours sitting in that parking lot, staring at the cracked asphalt while memories of my life unraveled in my mind. I replayed every interaction, every moment that might have hinted at this betrayal. I felt like a fool, like I'd been living in a house with a crumbling foundation, oblivious until the floor gave way beneath me. But I couldn't sit there forever. I had to face what came next. When I returned home, the house was silent except for the faint sound of a television upstairs. Kelly was in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, like she'd been crying. She started to speak, but I held up a hand. I don't want to hear any excuses, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I want answers. The truth. No more lies. She nodded, swallowing hard. Okay, she whispered. You deserve that. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as she began to talk. She told me how it started, innocently, of course. She and Eric had bonded during his visit, she said. They talked more after he left, first just catching up, then about deeper things. She claimed it wasn't about me, that she wasn't trying to replace me. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. I know how it sounds, but I was lonely, Adam. You were so wrapped up in work and everything else that I started to feel invisible. Invisible? I shot back, my voice rising. And what Eric saw you, is that it? My own brother? Her silence was answer enough. Have you slept with it? I asked, dreading the answer, but knowing I needed to hear it. Kelly looked down, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. It only happened once, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Rage surged through me. I wanted to scream, to punch a hole in the wall, to break something. But instead, I just stood there, letting the weight of her words crush me. How could you do this? I asked, my voice breaking. To me, to our kids, with him of all people? I don't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't thinking. It just... Stop. I interrupted, holding up a hand. I can't listen to you justify this. You knew exactly what you were doing. As I stormed out of the room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't want to look, but something told me I needed to. When I did, I saw a text from Eric. Eric, we need to talk. Please. I let out a bitter laugh. He had some nerve. I slammed my phone onto the counter and poured myself a drink, but it didn't take the edge off. Nothing could. Later that night, after Kelly had gone to bed, or pretended to, I stared at Eric's message again. Against my better judgment, I called him. He picked up after one ring. Adam, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. You don't get to apologize, I snapped. You don't get to make this better. Can you just let me explain? He pleaded. Explain? Explain what? That you couldn't find anyone else to ruin but your own brother's family? That's your explanation? There was a long pause. It was a mistake, he finally said, his voice quiet. A mistake. I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You don't accidentally sleep with your brother's wife, Eric. He started to say something else, but I hung up. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I sat there in the dark kitchen, the silence pressing down on me. The walls I'd built around my life, my marriage, my family, my identity were gone. I was standing in the rubble, and I didn't know where to start rebuilding. Part 4. Secrets Unraveled. The days that followed were a haze of anger, sadness, and confusion. I tried to keep things normal for the kids. They didn't deserve to feel the cracks forming beneath their feet. But every time I looked at Kelly, my stomach twisted into knots. She tried to reach out, to talk, to explain herself, but I couldn't bear to hear her voice. Eric kept trying too. He called, texted, even emailed me. I deleted every message without reading. What was there to say? He wasn't just my brother. He'd been my best friend, someone I trusted more than anyone else. That trust was gone, shattered into pieces I didn't think could ever be put back together. One night, after I put the kids to bed, I found myself pacing the living room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I grabbed my keys and left, needing air, needing space. I didn't know where I was going until I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. My mom answered the door, her face lighting up in surprise. "Adam, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Dad," I said, stepping inside. My dad was in the den, watching some old Western. When he saw me, he muted the TV. "What's up, kiddo?" he asked, but his smile faded when he saw my face. I sat down and told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I couldn't. I needed someone to understand the gravity of what had happened. As I spoke, my dad's expression shifted from disbelief to anger to sadness. "That little bastard," he muttered when I finished. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I can't even think straight." My dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said. "But you can't let this eat you alive. You need to confront Eric face to face. He owes you that much." I shook my head. "I don't think I can." "You can," he said firmly. "And you will. You need answers, Adam. You deserve them." Reluctantly, I agreed. The next day, I texted Eric to meet me at a coffee shop in town. He responded almost immediately, "I'll be there." When I arrived, Eric was already waiting, sitting at a corner table. He looked different, disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. Good, I thought bitterly. He should suffer. He stood as I approached. "Adam, sit down," I said coldly, cutting him off. I took the seat across from him, arms crossed. "Talk," I said, "and don't waste my time." Eric looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the coffee cup in front of him. "I don't know where to start," he said. "How about the part where you decided it was okay to sleep with my wife?" He winced. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned." "Stop," I snapped. "I'm not here for excuses. I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" Eric hesitated, then sighed. "It started after my last visit. We kept texting, and it just escalated. It wasn't supposed to happen, Adam. I swear." "Don't you dare swear anything to me," I said through clenched teeth. Eric looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was in a bad place, and Kelly, don't you dare blame her," I interrupted. "This isn't just on her. You made a choice. Both of you did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of his betrayal hung between us, a chasm I knew we could never cross. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," Eric said finally. I laughed bitterly. "Make it right?" "There's no making this right, Eric. You've destroyed everything." I stood, shoving my chair back so hard it nearly toppled over. "We're done," I said. "You're not my brother anymore." Eric's face crumpled, but I didn't care. I walked out without looking back, the door slamming shut behind me. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I confronted Eric, but I didn't feel better. If anything, the pain felt sharper, more real. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Part 5. A Cracked Reflection. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with Eric's words, trying to piece together what little sense I could from his half-hearted apologies. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. When I walked through the door, Kelly was waiting in the living room. She looked small, almost frail, sitting on the edge of the couch. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes puffy from crying. "Did you talk to him?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked past her to the kitchen, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and poured myself a whiskey. The burn felt grounding, like a match igniting in the pit of my stomach. Finally, I turned to face her. I did, I said. Kelly's eyes searched mine. And it doesn't change anything, I said flatly. He betrayed me, just like you did. She flinched, but I couldn't stop. The words poured out like poison. You know, I keep asking myself how this happened, I said, my voice rising. How did the woman I built my life with, the mother of my children, decide it was okay to rip everything apart? Was it worth it, Kelly? Was he worth it? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what's wrong with me, Adam. I feel like I'm falling apart. You don't know? I barked out a bitter laugh. Well, that makes two of us. She stood then, taking a shaky step toward me. I made a mistake, she said. A terrible mistake. But I love you, Adam. I love our family. I don't want to lose that. Her words cut me in a different way, sharp and jagged. How could she say she loved me after what she'd done? You already lost it, I said, my voice cold. You made that choice when you decided to sneak around with him. You threw it all away. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I saw something break in her. She sank back onto the couch, her face in her hands. Do you think this is easy for me? She sobbed. I hate myself for what I did. Every second of every day, I hate myself. Her words hung in the air, a raw confession I wasn't sure I believed. I wanted to lash out, to hurt her the way she'd hurt me, but instead, I turned and walked away. I locked myself in our bedroom and stared at the ceiling for hours. Sleep was impossible. My mind churned with questions I couldn't answer. Why had this happened? Could I ever move past it? Did I even want to? The next morning, I avoided Kelly altogether. I took the kids to the park, needing their laughter to drown out the noise in my head. But even their joy couldn't silence the nagging thought that kept surfacing. What if there was more to this? When we got home, I waited until Kelly was out of the house to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, invasive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't have the whole story. What I found shattered what little hope I had left. There were more messages from Eric, one she hadn't deleted. Messages about how much he missed her, how much he wished he could be with her. And then, the one that broke me. Eric, I don't regret any of it. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Part 6, The Second Betrayal. I stared at the message until the words blurred. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as the realization sank in. This wasn't just a one-time mistake, some fleeting moment of weakness. It was still happening. The phone shook in my hand as I scrolled through the messages, piecing together a story I didn't want to know. They were still talking, still meeting. The betrayal hadn't ended. It had only gone underground. I confronted Kelly that evening. She had just come home from running errands, or so she claimed. The moment she walked through the door, I held up her phone. What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice like a whip. Her face paled. She knew immediately what I'd found. Adam, don't you dare try to lie to me, I said, cutting her off. You told me it was over. You swore to me it was over. Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't about to let them sway me. I didn't know how to stop, she said, her voice trembling. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't know how to stop? You made a choice, Kelly. You chose him. Again and again. You chose him over me, over our family. She took a step toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't. Just don't. Adam, please, she begged. I love you. I love our kids. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Her words only fueled my anger. Fix us? I spat. You're still talking to him, Kelly. You're still sneaking around, lying to my face. There's no us to fix anymore. The kids, sensing the tension, peeked around the corner. I lowered my voice, not wanting them to hear the worst of it. Go to your room, I said sharply. Now! They hesitated, their wide eyes darting between us, but they obeyed. Once they were out of earshot, I turned back to Kelly. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice breaking. I can't keep pretending that this marriage isn't dead. Her tears spilled over, and she dropped to her knees in front of me. Please, Adam, she sobbed. Please don't give up on us. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. Just tell me what to do. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she could change, that we could rebuild what she had destroyed. But then I thought about Eric's message, about the way she had looked at me when I confronted her the first time. With guilt, yes, but not remorse. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she got caught. You know what you can do, Kelly? I said coldly. You can leave. Pack a bag and go. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Her eyes widened in shock. You're kicking me out? I'm protecting myself, I said. And our kids. You've made your choices. Now I'm making mine. For a moment, she didn't move, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, slowly, she got to her feet. This isn't over, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're right, I said. It's not over. It's just the beginning of the end. She packed a bag and left that night. As the door closed behind her, I felt a mix of relief and despair. The house was quieter, emptier, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I couldn't live like this anymore. Part 7, Ghosts of Trust. The days after Kelly left were both freeing and suffocating. The quiet of the house, once a balm after long days, now felt oppressive. The kids asked questions I didn't know how to answer. When's Mom coming back? Did you have a fight? I did my best to shield them from the truth, but every deflection felt like another crack in the already broken family picture. I wanted to focus on them, to pour my energy into being the best father I could. But Eric's betrayal haunted me just as much as Kelly's. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw him, the same face, the same eyes. The resemblance that had once felt like a badge of brotherhood now felt like a curse. I debated whether to tell our parents. Part of me wanted to protect them from the ugly truth, but another part wanted to see Eric face the consequences of his actions. He didn't get to walk away from this unscathed while I carried the weight of his betrayal alone. It was Mom's birthday that weekend, and we were all supposed to gather at their house for dinner. I wasn't sure if I could stomach being in the same room as Eric, but I knew skipping it would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. So I went. When I arrived, Eric was already there, sitting on the couch like nothing had happened. He greeted me with a cautious smile, as if testing the waters. I ignored him, walking past him to hug Mom. Everything okay? She asked, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Yeah, elite. Just tired. The evening dragged on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. I avoided Eric, keeping my distance as we made small talk and passed around plates of lasagna. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for an opening. It came after dinner when I stepped outside for air. I was leaning against the porch railing, staring at the stars, when Eric joined me. Adam, he started, his voice low. Don't, I said, not looking at him. Please, just hear me out, he pleaded. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to say this. I clenched my jaw, but didn't walk away. He took that as permission to continue. I messed up, he said. I know that. I've been going over it in my head every single day, trying to figure out how I let it get this far. And the truth is, I don't have an excuse. I let my feelings cloud my judgment. I betrayed you in the worst way possible, and I'll never forgive myself for it. His words sounded sincere, but they didn't land the way he probably hoped. Do you think that changes anything? I asked, finally turning to face him. Do you think an apology erases what you did? You didn't just screw up, Eric. You tore my life apart. You took my wife, my trust, my sense of security, and you destroyed them. He looked down, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice barely audible. Sorry isn't enough, I said coldly. You don't get to say sorry and walk away from this. You don't get to be part of my life anymore. His head snapped up. You don't mean that. I do, I said, my voice firm. I mean every word. You're not my brother anymore. Not after this. For a moment, he looked like he was going to argue, but then he nodded, his eyes glistening. If that's what you need, he said, his voice breaking, I'll respect it. He walked back inside, leaving me alone with the cool night air and the crushing weight of my decision. Cutting him off felt like severing a limb, painful and unnatural, but it was the only way I could begin to heal. As I drove home that night, I made a silent promise to myself and to my kids. I wouldn't let this define us. The wounds were deep, but they wouldn't be permanent. Part 8. The Aftermath. The weeks after that dinner were a blur of hard choices and harder conversations. Kelly called every day, sometimes multiple times, begging for another chance. At first, I ignored her. Hearing her voice felt like ripping open a wound that was already struggling to heal. But the kids had questions I couldn't keep dodging forever. They missed their mom. No matter what had happened between us, she was still their mother, and they deserved answers. One evening, after tucking them into bed, I finally called Kelly back. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said softly. "When?" "Tomorrow. I'll come by your parents' house." The next day, I drove to her parents' place, my chest tight with anxiety. I hadn't seen her since the night I told her to leave. When she opened the door, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, her eyes hollow. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I followed her into the living room, where we sat on opposite ends of the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm not here to rehash everything," I said finally. "We've said enough, but we need to figure out how we're going to handle this for the kids." Kelly nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know. I've been thinking about that too." We talked logistics, when she would see the kids, how we would handle holidays, what we would tell them. It was the most civil conversation we'd had in months, but it was also the most painful. Every word felt like a reminder of what we'd lost. As we wrapped up, Kelly leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Adam, I know you don't believe me, but I still love you. I never stopped loving you." I looked away, her words stirring a mix of anger and sadness. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said quietly. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But if there's even a part of you that can forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't let it sway me. "This isn't something you can fix with apologies or promises, Kelly," I said. "You didn't just hurt me, you broke something in me, and I don't know if it can be fixed." She sobbed openly then, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't. It wasn't my job anymore. When I left, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by anger or despair. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to move forward. Eric, on the other hand, was another story. Cutting him off had been the right decision, but it left a void I didn't know how to fill. I missed him, even though I hated him. It was a confusing, conflicting feeling that gnawed at me every day. My parents eventually learned the truth, not from me, but from Eric. Mom called me in tears, begging me to forgive him, to give him another chance. "I can't, Mom," I said, my voice heavy. "Not right now. Maybe not ever." The holidays loomed closer, bringing with them a sense of dread. They were always a time for family, for togetherness. This year, they felt like a minefield. As the days ticked by, I realized something. The life I'd built, the family I thought was unshakable, was gone. But that didn't mean I couldn't build something new. Part 9. A new foundation. The first Christmas after the fallout was the loneliest one I'd ever experienced. The kids stayed with Kelly, and the house felt cavernous without their laughter. I decorated a tree by myself, the ornaments reminding me of happier times, times that now felt like someone else's life. But amid the silence, I began to find clarity. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my marriage or my brother. I was mourning the person I used to be. The man who believed in unbreakable bonds, in the simplicity of love and loyalty. That man was gone, but maybe, just maybe, something stronger could take his place. I threw myself into rebuilding. I hired a therapist, someone to help me untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying. I leaned on friends I hadn't reached out to in years, and to my surprise, they showed up for me in ways I didn't expect. The kids came back to me after Christmas, their faces lighting up when they saw the presents waiting under the tree. I made hot cocoa, we built a fort in the living room, and for the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of joy. They were my anchor, my reason to keep going. As the months passed, Kelly and I settled into a co-parenting rhythm. She kept her promises. She went to therapy, stayed open and communicative, and avoided dating. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't let myself hope for reconciliation. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. Eric, meanwhile, remained a ghost. He tried once to send me a letter, a long, handwritten apology that Mom delivered to me with trembling hands. I didn't read it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the space between us made room for other things. I started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned long ago: woodworking, jogging, even painting. It felt strange at first, rediscovering who I was outside of my roles as a husband and brother. But slowly, I started to see glimpses of a person I could be proud of. Then came the biggest surprise of all. One sunny Saturday at the park, while the kids played on the swings, a woman approached me. She had a kind smile and a warmth that felt genuine. "You look like you could use some company," she said, gesturing to the bench I was sitting on. I laughed, unsure of what to say. Her name was Rachel, and she was there with her niece and nephew. We talked for hours, the conversation easy and natural. When the kids begged for ice cream, we ended up walking together to a nearby shop. It wasn't love at first sight. I wasn't ready for that. But it was something, a reminder that there were still good people out there. That connection was still possible. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. Life doesn't end with betrayal. It changes, it shifts, but it keeps going. And maybe, just maybe, there's hope on the other side of heartbreak. Kelly and I would never go back to what we were. Eric and I might never speak again. But I was still here, still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that was enough.